Hi, I'm Sterling Edwards. Let's spend a few minutes doing a free art lesson. We're going to work on negative painting. Now, I don't mind telling you, that's one of the hardest aspects of watercolors I had to learn. It took me a long time. I was so frustrated with it. And I teach workshops all through the U.S. and Canada, and every place I go, people say the same thing. They say, I just cannot get the grasp of negative painting. It's such a powerful concept. I want to show you an exercise that I teach in my workshops that really does help put it all in order for you, and it helps you understand the concept behind negative painting. It also helps you see negative shapes. Now let's first discuss what is a negative shape. If I were to paint my hand, and I actually take a brush and paint all the fingers in the palm or the back of my hand, that's a positive shape. I'm actually painting the hand. So I would have a dark shape on white paper. On the other hand, if I wanted to have a lighter shape on darker paper, I would paint around the hand and paint all these wedges in between the fingers and paint the area around the back of the hand. It's almost like taking your hand and putting it on a wall and spray painting it and then taking your hand off. You've got a very nice impression. That's a negative shape. You didn't actually paint the hand, you painted all the space around it. Now, a lot of people say, why is that so important? Why do we have to learn this? It is a tough thing to learn, and with practice it becomes very easy, but at first it's a hard concept because we're not trained to see things as negative shapes. All of our life we're given coloring books and we're told to stay inside the lines, don't go outside the lines, don't do this, don't do that. Now all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, well, I want you to paint everything outside the lines, don't paint anything inside the lines. And we're just not trained, we're not programmed from childhood to see things in that manner. The reason we have to do this, if you use watercolors, especially if you use transparent watercolors like I do, you cannot paint a light color over a dark. It just gets absorbed and it's gone. So if you want to have a nice light shape, for example, you want a nice white birch tree against a dark forest, there's two ways you can do this. You've either got to mask out that birch tree, which means using a liquid masking fluid, or you've got to paint around the birch tree with darks so that the white shape stands out. What I have found is if I can eliminate the masking fluid as much as possible, my work has more continuity. The shapes all kind of work and they flow together and there's not a lot of hard edges, which masking sometimes leaves. Now, sometimes we have to use a masking fluid. It's a great product, it's a great tool, and I've used it for 20 years. I love it when I need it. But if I can do a negative shape as in lieu of doing the masking, I find my work has a more natural look. I can also work much faster because I haven't got to be masking things out and waiting for it to dry, then taking it off and so forth. So let's do a simple exercise now. And bear with me as I go through this, and I'll explain in detail what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I think you'll see in a few minutes just how easy this is. Not only is it easy, it can be very fun once you get the hang of it. Now, if you want to follow along with me, that's fine. I suggest you watch this a couple times and really find out where it's all going. And I think you'll agree this is a neat way to paint. This is the exercise I teach in my workshop. Let's just say, for example, you have some ground, and I want a tree. There's a tree right there. And I want to paint this as a light shape against a dark background. Now, anytime I do a negative shape, especially when I'm learning, don't hesitate to take the pencil and draw it in. Give yourself a fighting chance here. Now, the key is I'm going to have to use what's called lost and found edges. A lost and found edge process basically means I'm going to color all this area out here and all this area out here with paint. The found edge is going to define the edge of my tree. This outside edge, I want to just kind of lose it. I can do that by blending the edge away with a damp brush. So a lost and found edge is the found edge defines the shape, the other edge you want to lose. So let's try it and see how it works. Let's come over to the palette real quick, and let's just mix up a nice little wet mix. Let's start with some of this pretty violet. I'm using Lukas paints today. They're a very nice paint. They have a great consistency and they're very rich. I really like them. They're fun to work with. So I've got a nice wet mix. Now I'm going to leave that brush in there for a second, and I'm also going to get this. Now this is a brush, it's a stiff bristle brush. This happens to be the brush I designed, this is my blending and glazing brush, but you could almost use any stiff brush. Here's an old oil painting brush I've had for years. The main thing is, it's not so much the brush, it's what you do with it in this case. I want to have a brush that I can very lightly blend these edges away with. So we're going to use the soft nylon brush to lay in the color. Then we're going to come in behind it with this, and we're going to lose the edge we don't want. So let me make sure, I'm going to make sure this brush is clean. And I've got a Kleenex in my hand. I've got a couple of Kleenexes. And I'm squeezing all the excess water out of that brush. Now, that's the key to making this thing work. I don't want to lose that edge with a real wet brush. Make sure you get most of the water out of it. So let's take some of this violet, and let's start over here, for example, and let's just come right down the edge of that tree. You notice I'm coming out a pretty good ways from the tree. I'm not just coming in like this, making a little line. Lay that brush down and lay in some color. Now I want to come in from this side and lose that outside edge. So I'm taking this damp brush and just kind of working the paint until the edge is gone. Now I'm going to wipe that off. As you can see, I picked up a lot of paint doing that. The key also is to keep this brush clean while you're doing the blending. So let's get the brush clean again. Again, squeeze the water out of it. Now let's come in and do the other part, the other side of it. Well, let's do this little part right here in the middle first. Let's just do this. Now in this case, there's no reason to even try to lose an edge. It's too tight a shape. Let's come over on this side and paint that side. So this is my found edge, defines my tree. This edge we want to lose. So we've got the damp brush. We're coming in from the dry side, working into the wet paint. And just kind of blend that edge out. Let me get rid of that little spot right there. So what we have is a nice suggestion of a lighter tree against a darker background. Now all this area in here, I can put more trees. If I want to give the impression as though I'm walking back through the woods, this tree is in the foreground, there'll be more trees behind it, and more trees behind them, and more trees behind them, all done as negative shapes. Now I'm going to stop real quickly and dry this, because this has to be done on dry paper. Don't try to put your next shapes in on wet paper, because the paint just runs. We want nice dry paper so we can get these hard edges. And I'll come back in just a second after I dry this, and we'll put in some more negative trees. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I did have to stop and dry this paper, like I said, because on wet paper you cannot get this very sharp edge, and this is so critical if you can do really strong, powerful negative shapes. Now here's how we're going to make this thing work. We've already got one tree with a white tree against this violet background. The violet color on each side of that tree is going to be the color of my next tree. Now let's put another tree right here, for example, and I'm going to draw this very darkly so it shows up on camera. So here's another tree right here. This tree will be violet, and we're going to make it stand out by putting dark on each side. And again, we'll start feathering the edges. If you have a small area like this, where there's really not a whole lot of room to blend, don't worry about feathering the edge, just put the color in. Areas like this, where it goes out a pretty good ways, go ahead and take a few minutes and blend it out. Let's put another tree right here, for example. And you can see in a few minutes just how powerful this is, and how much this will add depth and dimension to your paintings. I will say this too, if I had to stop and misc at each one of these trees, we'd be here for about 2 hours. This is a very fast way of doing it, and it does give the painting a nice look of continuity. It gives it a very, almost a painterly quality. So let's continue with it. Back over at the palette, I'm getting some more of that violet, adding a little more color to it. Remember, whatever color I put on there now has to be darker than the violet that's currently on the painting. So let's start up in this corner, and go ahead and bring this up. I'm just going right along my pencil line, doing the lost and found edge technique. There's the found edge that finds the tree. My blending brush is clean, squeezing most of the water out of it. That's so important. Come in from the dry side and kind of blend that edge out. And you can probably actually hear that scrubbing the paper, and then wipe it off. Once again, I picked up a lot of paint, so keep that brush clean. I'm going to lift a little of that color off of there so it's not quite so intense. Now let's come in and do these little small areas in between. These are too small to blend. We're going to just paint them in. So I'm taking them right up to the white tree. This technique works beautiful whether you're painting a flower and you want a lot of stems and leaves. Maybe you're painting a farm scene and you want a barn in the distance. You can paint around the barn as a negative shape. Now this little tree over here, again, I'm kind of coloring in the area between the trees. There's not enough room there to go in and blend. So we're going to just kind of do a little creative coloring just to tone that paper down. This side, however, there's plenty of room to blend it out. So let's just bring this violet color all the way out, bring it out a pretty good way. Don't skim the tree. I see people going like this, putting a little tiny line like that, and then they take that brush and they're going like this, trying to blend it out. Don't be timid. Lay the color in, lay it in big like this. Go right down the side of that tree. It's much easier, and the result is much more pleasing. Now let's come in from the dry side. Come in from the dry side, work into that paint with a damp brush and lose that edge. So now I've got 3 trees. This one obviously is in the foreground. These 2 are a little bit further back in the woods. Now, you can do this 20 layers deep. Each time you go deeper, the trees get darker. This color purple I just put down will be the color of the next tree. We're going to do one more layer of that color, and then we're going to go crazy with this and really put some rich dark in the background. Because this is a chance to also demonstrate not just how to do a negative shape, but how to get over your fear of dark values. Watercolors are notorious for painting very pale, washed out paintings. And if they would just get over that hurdle of being afraid of darks and just go for the dark values, your work is going to soar. It's going to be noticed, and that's what we're all searching for. So once again, bear with me. I'm going to stop just for a second and dry this, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Everything's nice and dry, so now we can go back in and put some more trees. Now here's what we're going to do on this piece. I'm going to do one more tree here and one more tree here as a negative shape. This color is the color of the tree. We're going to put dark on each side. Then we're going to stop once more to dry it. Then we're going to come in and put some really dark, and I want you to watch how this whole thing just springs off the paper. It really comes alive. The dark values are going to really push it out. So let's do one more real quick. And again, don't hesitate to take a pencil and draw it in. So there's another tree right here. And let's put one over here like this. And we're just doing these as quick little sketches just to illustrate the practice of the negative painting. So again, I'm going back to the palette. I'm taking that same violet. We're going to do this whole thing in one color just for illustration purposes. It makes it much easier if you just try it in one color. You can always paint these in numerous colors, but when you're first learning, do a monochromatic piece like I'm doing. It makes it so much easier to learn how to control the lights, darks, and midtones. So we got that same violet. Once again, let's come in and paint some of the tight areas that don't need to be blended. And let's work on this outside area. Now that looks pretty dark, but trust me, it will dry much lighter. And what you're going to begin seeing in a few minutes, you can see this whole thing just start coming alive. And there's going to be so much dimension and so much depth, which I think is one of the beautiful things about negative painting. If you have an opportunity, check out my website, sterlingedwards.com. I've got probably about 40 or 50 paintings on there, a variety of subjects and styles, and every one of them, you'll see a heavy influence of negative shapes. Negative painting is so wonderful. And once you learn how to do it, it's almost addictive. It's so much fun, you just want to put negative shapes everywhere. Now let's work on this tree over here. And again, I'm not worrying about losing those, blending in the edges. It's just a little bit too tight of an area. I'm going to fill that little area right inside here, just make it a little darker right in there. Right now, this area out here, once again, let's come out wide from the tree. There's our found edge. We're going to take the bristle brush, it's clean. I'm using a Kleenex to squeeze most of the water out of it. Once again, come in from the dry side and slowly work into that wet paint and lose that outside edge. Just get a beautiful blended lost and found edge. And again, wipe the brush off. Now, I hate to do this to you, but I got to stop one more time and dry this, and then we're going to come in and we're going to finish this piece. But if you look, you can already see just a variety of different levels you have going through the woods. Now we're going to come back in a few minutes after this dries. We're going to put in some very, very darks in this background, specifically around this larger white tree. I might even put a positive tree over here just to give you something to relate the difference between positive shapes and negative shapes. And why not just go and have some more fun with it and indicate a light source and put a few shadows coming through the woods just to really make it almost look like a painting. So this gives you a good idea really just how to work on negative shapes, how to lose edges, how to visualize where a negative shape might be. I promise you, if you do this enough, you'll eventually get to where you won't need a pencil line. You'll just envision a tree and you'll just start painting it. Let's stop about 2 more minutes real quick while I dry this, then we'll come back and we'll finish this piece. Thank you. Okay, once again, we're back. This is a drawn-out process, but I do assure you, if you'll take the time to dry your paper in between shapes, it makes the job so much easier. Now let's come back in here between these larger shapes, the larger trees, maybe back in these areas. Let's put another tree, and again, I'm drawing it in. Only this time, that's going to be the color of the tree, and we're going to put a very, very deep, dark purple behind it. The same color we've been using, only more paint and less water. That makes it very dark. I might even come in afterwards and just pop a few suggestions of trees back here, using the dark as well. Everything we've done so far is a negative shape. If I promise you, if you'll practice this exercise within a day or two, you're going to have it down pat. So let's do it. Let's take some more of this purple. Now this time we're really, really getting dark with it. And if you can see my palette, this is a very dark mix. There's not a whole lot of water in it. It's almost the consistency of melted butter, as opposed to a wet wash, which might be referred to as maybe a water with food coloring. Let's start right here and take it right next to that lighter tree and put this darker tree in. And what you're going to see is this whole painting is going to suddenly spring to life with this dark value. Look at the difference that makes. This is the step most watercolors fail to do. And I really push people in the workshop. I say just go darker, and when you think you got dark enough, go darker yet. And it's amazing. Let's put a little tree back here. It's amazing how just a few really rich dark shapes in a painting give the painting so much depth and volume. It makes all the other shapes stand out, but it also makes the white lighter. But it's an optical illusion. You can't really make this paper whiter than it is, but you can make it appear whiter by putting a dark color on it. Now let's put a couple right in here. Let's put one right in here. And these aren't drawn in. We're just kind of painting off the cuff right now. Just a few little suggestions of trees in the background. And maybe even there's one, let's suggest something back over in this area. This is fun. I mean, you'll get to where you can just sit there and do this all day long and enjoy it. And the results sometimes are quite pleasing. Now, if you look at this, there's a lot of depth in this piece. We're not just talking about shapes. Now we have dimension, we have foreground, middle ground, background, and you can just go back as far as you want. And I think I'm also, just for purposes of illustration, I'm going to put a positive tree right here. Now, a positive tree, I'm actually taking the brush and painting the tree. So it gives you a little relationship as far as the way the two look. You got your positive tree, and you got your negative tree. So here we've got a dark shape against light, whereas here we have light shapes against dark. If you'll balance the two out. Now, one thing I teach in my workshops, I teach about the rule of opposites. Whatever you put in a painting, drop in the opposite somewhere. If you've got a lot of negative shapes, pop in a positive shape. If you have a lot of cool colors, drop in some warm colors, and so forth. And it gives the painting a very well-rounded look of continuity. The shapes all kind of flow together. Now, one thing I want to do too, since we got just another minute or so, let's take a very, very light wash of this violet. If you look back at the palette, that's a very, very light wash. I'm adding some water to it. And I want to suggest maybe there's a little bit of light kind of coming through the woods like this. The light is coming through the woods, and you can see little suggestions of shadows on some of these trees. This side of the tree here is away from the lights. We're just dropping a little bit of shadow color on it. And I'm taking a little bit of water and just very lightly kind of softening that. There's a few suggestions of shadows of cast branches. Now let's do some on this little guy over here. There's a couple of shadows coming across the tree. So the whole piece is still done using a monochromatic palette. Any side of the tree that's away from the light gets a little shadow, and there's a few little suggestions of cast branches, or cast shadows from branches up above that are shining down the tree. So it starts taking on a very almost semi-abstract look, but it has a very realistic look to it to a certain degree. Now, just for illustration purposes, I want to show you this one thing, then we're going to call it quits on this piece, because we've really gone as far as we can go with it. This is an old oil painting brush. I've had this for many years. It's a stiff bristle. You can probably hear it. It's great for lifting color depending on the paper you're using. Now, this is Fabriano 300-pound Artistico. Fabriano paper has a very soft surface. It's very easy to lift color. And we're going to come in just a second, and we're going to lift out a few suggestions of highlights hitting these background trees. For example, these trees back in here are relatively dark. It's not going to do any good to paint a dark shadow going across it because you already have a dark shape. Instead of putting the dark shadow in, we're going to lift out the light hitting it. So we're taking this brush, it's barely damp. I'm squeezing most water out of it. And let's just come in here right now and just lift out a little highlight. So we're scrubbing a little bit, and blotting it with the Kleenex. Now we have some light back in the back of the woods. And again, this is a variety of techniques, but it really works. It goes a long way to giving a piece a lot of dimension, because now we have not only a background, foreground, and middle ground, we also have a defined light source. And when I do a lot of my paintings, this is exactly how I do them. There's no magic to this. It's just good, solid technique and a little bit of practice, and have fun with it. Just let the paint work with you, see what you can do with it. This big tree right here, for example, just have a little cast sunlight on that tree. So I'm just loosening the pigment in a few places and wiping it off. It's a neat effect, and it works like a charm. I hope this helps you. Like I said, negative painting is tough. It's the one thing, foremost, that gives my students a lot of problems at workshops. And this is the exact exercise I teach them, and I've seen this help hundreds of people. Try this, I think you'll enjoy it. I've enjoyed being here. If you have a chance, be sure to look at my website, sterlingedwards.com. You'll see all these paintings where these techniques were employed. Thank you.